What is a mentor? What comes to your mind when you hear that word? It might interest you to know that in Greek mythology, Mentor was the friend of Odysseus, who he left in charge of his household while he was in Troy, and who was the teacher and the protector of Telemachus, Odysseus' son. So that sets a context. The question now would be, who has been a teacher and guide for you? I often think that the basic task of human life is to discover who you are and whose you are. So in that light, a mentor is someone who teaches and guides you as you come to discover who you are and whose you are. Sometimes, perhaps most often, those mentors are living people with whom we've journeyed in this life. But at other times, those mentors can be people who walked this earth long before us, but whose witnesses of life, love, fidelity, or service continue to guide us. They continue to light the path for us, or they inspire us. For me, such a person is St. Alphonsus Liguori. Who was he and why was he important for me? I have learned a lot from St. Alphonsus. He took a terrible experience of betrayal and disillusionment and turned it into a positive by allowing God to redirect him. I believe, with Alphonsus, that God is a God of surprises and often speaks loudest when we are at our weakest. St. Alphonsus Liguori was a nobleman from Naples, born in 1696. He was a genius, and by the age of 16, he had doctorates in both civil law and canon or church law. He practiced successfully as a lawyer for 7 years until, because of corruption, he lost the first court case. Totally disillusioned, he gave up law. He had already been doing volunteer work in the Hospital for the Incurables in Naples. Now he turned his attention more fully to the poor, became a seminarian, a catechist, and finally a priest, preferring to preach the good news among the poorest of the poor. After 9 years, in 1732, exhausted from his work, Alphonsus took a holiday at Scala on the Amalfi Coast, a most beautiful part of Italy. He didn't even intend to spend his holiday there. But at a nearby town, sea conditions made it imperative that the boat put ashore near Scala, and there Alphonsus met the poor shepherds and goatherds who once again caused him to redirect his life. In those days, the church had closed out in most of the village churches in rural Italy. The priests were gone to the cities, and no priest could make a living in a rural parish, where tons of people who hadn't been baptized or hadn't received their first communion, hadn't had a chance to make their first reconciliation, and had never met a priest, had never met Jesus. Even more shocking, and Alphonsus and his friends, as they began to work around in that area of Italy, before it was even Italy, it was Naples at the time, the Kingdom of Naples, they began to find that there were these people who'd never heard of Jesus. And they began to proclaim Jesus and the hope and the joy that he brings to people whose lives were changed by that encounter. But even before Alphonsus founded the Redemptorists, he, like me, had that heart for the poor. And in Naples, as a young man, a student studying for the priesthood, he saw that in Naples, as well as out in the countryside, there were these people who had never met Jesus or had never met him in such a way that his message was proclaimed as good news. Alphonsus listened to the poor, and he founded the Redemptorists to meet the spiritual needs of these shepherds and goatherds. In this, once again, Alphonsus teaches me. He teaches me to listen to the voices of those around me, and to respond where I can and should. He teaches me to look for opportunities presented by God, where my skills and love meet the real needs of people. I love the way St. Alphonsus said in his first draft of the Redemptorist Rule, the constitutions by which Redemptorists live, that the purpose of the Redemptorist community is to continue Christ, not to imitate him, to continue Christ. I've learned a lot from St. Alphonsus here. It's not by my words that people will be inspired to come to know Jesus Christ. First, it's by my example, First, I'm called to be the hands, the feet, the face, the eyes of Jesus Christ for others, especially those who desperately need to encounter Him, to encounter His good news, and then they need to hear the words. I think that another thing I've learned from St. Alphonsus is that relationships are key, and that a living and life-giving relationship with Jesus Christ is the foundation on which everything else is built. Alphonsus wrote 111 books, but the one I love best is probably the simplest one he ever wrote. It was called How to Converse Continually and Often with God as a Friend. That must have been revolutionary in 1750, the thought that you could converse with God as a friend. I'm sure people thought that prayer was me talking to God, using formula prayers to talk to God. And this idea that there could be a conversation back and forth was revolutionary. One of the things that Alphonsus said in the book is, you could be out walking in the woods. And what you do there is imagine, for example, if you hear a babbling brook. The babbling brook is God speaking to you. What would God say? When I try to teach busy people to pray today, I'll talk to them about how God uses ordinary events and people and signs to speak to us. For example, if you're driving down the road in your car and you see a merge sign, you could ask yourself, what's God saying to me in the merge sign? There's always something. God is always talking to us. Are we listening? You wouldn't believe the things that people can get from a merge sign. Alphonsus is also a mentor for me in terms of aging. He never let the limitations he faced as he aged become barriers to his drive to continue to proclaim the good news. When his preaching voice became weak, he turned to writing. When he lost his eyesight, he asked people to read to him. He remained curious, devoted, and active almost to the end of his life. In this, he teaches me not only about myself and the attitude that I wish to have, he also teaches me about how I want to view others, and how I would wish to encourage family members and friends who are aging. You and I come from a long line of faithfulness. St. Alphonsus is part of my long line of faithfulness. Who has been part of your long line of faithfulness? Today, I encourage you to think about the people who have shaped you, molded you, and mentored you, and to give thanks for them. In them, God has poured out God's abundant, abiding love. And then, go and do likewise. You are then called to be a mentor for others, taking on apprentices in the Christian life, guiding them, teaching them, leading them, and when the time is right, encouraging them to spread their wings.